In this video, we're going to talk about cognitive development in childhood. Development occurs across many domains and at different rates. Cognitive development occurs across a wide range of abilities, including problem solving, reasoning, remembering, perceiving, and understanding and producing language. A central question that developmental psychologists are trying to answer is what exactly is it in the mind that changes and what stays the same? And to try to understand whether these changes fall under discrete stages or not. So in a previous video, I discussed the concept of innateness, and I also mentioned the idea of the nature versus nurture debate, which I think is actually not a very useful framework for us for several reasons. While typically nature refers to biological forces like genetics, and nurture involves socialization and upbringing, these two categories of variables do not operate independently of each other. We know now that development typically involves an interaction between genes, or nature, with environment, or nurture. Some aspects of development that initially appeared to be explained by genes also involve experience. Another reason this isn't a great framework is because it neglects the fact that we're born with a rough draft for basic psychological concepts, many of which are modified through experience, but we have some elements of them when we're first born. A good example of this is depth perception. Humans, like other animals, are born with an ability to perceive depth in the environment. Depth perception is not acquired through experience. We know this because there are visual cliff experiments in healthy children who refuse to crawl over what they perceive to be a gap in the floor beneath them. What is acquired through experience is an ability to use depth perception in various physical environments. And as your textbook explains, this might include patterned light cues and a healthy functioning brain. When kids are deprived of light cues or have physical illnesses that inhibit vision, then depth perception does not develop properly. Some influential psychologists, such as Freud, Erik Erikson, Piaget, and Kohlberg, believe that kids develop in stages. That is, a child is born in a specific stage and must complete the stage before, quote, graduating to the next stage. I think as far as our understanding goes now, we know that the stage theories of development don't have very much evidence to support them, but it isn't totally crazy that scientists came up with these ideas in the first place. After all, we do see various stages of development in other creatures, such as caterpillars that morph into butterflies, and in young humans, it's pretty much unheard of for a 2-year-old to be able to read, whereas 10-year-olds are perfectly capable of doing this. So the idea behind stage theories is that there's some cognitive task that needs to be completed before moving on to the next task. Perhaps the best example of this, from a scientific perspective, comes from the work of Jean Piaget, who suggested that children must move through stages of cognitive development that are associated with skills and abilities that are acquired within these discrete stages. According to this theory, a child must complete the sensory motor stage before moving on to preoperational, etc. In the sensory motor stage, which is from birth to 2 years, children develop object permanence, which means that they understand that an object still exists even if they can't see it. This is thought to happen because during this stage, kids interact with the environment by playing with objects and learning through those experiences that objects can in fact stay intact over long periods of time. Preoperational reasoning is from 2 to 6 to 7 years, and during this stage, kids develop a more sophisticated understanding of objects and acquire the ability to speak at least one language fluently. Specifically, kids develop ideas about conservation. A good demonstration of this is from experiments where an adult pours liquid like orange juice from a large bottle into a smaller bottle and then asks the child whether the amount of orange juice has changed. And often the child will say, yes, it has changed, which of course is incorrect. In concrete operational stage, which is from 6 to 7 years to 11 to 12 years, kids master their understanding of objects in isolation from each other, but still cannot comprehend abstract principles or logical deduction. For instance, kids in the concrete operational stage sometimes have trouble with syllogisms because they can't utilize some ideas to make inferences about specific situations. They can only apply logical reasoning to objects they perceive as real and can be seen or interact with directly. The final stage, formal operational, happens at around 11 or 12 years old and roughly corresponds with the age of majority in most ancient societies, which is around 12 to 13 years. In this stage, individuals have the cognitive ability to reason about abstract principles in the same way that all adults do. At this age, individuals can start to think about how to do things like design scientific experiments or to create government policies that help people and are consistent with our underlying values. With all of this in mind, and because Piaget's theories are still required on tests like the GRE and the MCAT, I'd like to say that most developmental psychologists do not believe that kids develop according to this sequence. Rather, we now know that kids are born with initial ideas not just about things like conservation and object permanence, but also about abstract concepts like justice and fairness. Those concepts get developed over time and with experience, but not in a stage-like way. In your textbook, the chapter on cognitive development concludes with a discussion about how developmental psychology can be used to enhance kids' intellectual development. For example, by giving preschool-aged kids exposure to numbers and letters. The textbook authors also argue that because kids born to wealthier families tend to have this type of exposure early on in life, that can explain why they outperform kids from poorer families in standardized tests of abilities. But I am skeptical about this because other evidence strongly suggests that something different is happening. For one thing, developmental studies show that while kids who get early exposure to pre-K programs have an advantage over kids who don't at the start of kindergarten, that difference basically disappears after a year or two, and all kids end up at the same level. This is referred to as the fade-out effect for pre-K programs. One study even tracked kids until 6th grade, and this was even better because this study was a true experiment where some kids were randomly assigned to attend pre-K while others were randomly assigned to not. And the ones who were randomly assigned to attend pre-K actually had lower standardized achievement test scores in the 3rd through 6th grades compared to children without pre-K. And they were also more likely to have behavior problems with higher rates of disciplinary infractions. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that early exposure to letters and numbers is bad for kids' development. What it could mean is that the programs that we have that are designed to do this in school settings are just doing a very poor job because there's something about school that is bad for kids' cognitive and behavioral development. So it could be that we just need to rethink some of the basic elements and structures of school in order to help kids flourish there. In your textbook, there's some discussion about play and games that may be better for kids' cognitive development rather than school curriculum.